Well, let's continue with the valleys of Jerusalem, the three valleys. We're going to begin with the Kidron Valley, which is to the east. It lies between the Mount of Olives and the rest of Jerusalem to the west. We can see the Kidron Valley in this slide looking due north. You can make out the Temple Mount area, that rectangular box in the center of the picture. So where the words Kidron Valley are is really the summit of the Mount of Olives. And then just to the north of the bottom arrow, you can see where there's another valley that splits off to the left. That's going to be the Hinnom Valley, and we're going to look at that a little bit later. So the Hinnom Valley and the Kidron Valley join up just south of Jerusalem. Here we see the Kidron Valley, a deep valley, even to this day, over thousands of years of erosion. It's still quite steep and quite deep. We're looking due north. We can see the Mount of Olives off in the distance, and on the left-hand side toward the top of the picture we can see the Dome of the Rock and the El Aqsa Mosque. And then on the left edge of our picture, we see the city of David. So the Kidron Valley wraps around Jerusalem, separating the city proper from the Mount of Olives. It's a rather deep valley. Another valley to the west of the Kidron Valley is called the Tyropoeon Valley. We also call it the Central Valley. Now this valley has gotten filled in over the centuries due to the many destructions and rebuilding of Jerusalem, so it's hardly visible today, but we're going to look at some drawings that will represent it, and also the Jerusalem model from the time of Jesus that will show us how deep it really was in antiquity. So this kind of formed the western border to the city of David. So the city of David hill was surrounded on both sides by valleys, the Kidron Valley on the east and the Central Valley on the west. And in this slide, looking due north, we see the city of David in the center of our slide, the Kidron Valley in the shadow on the right, but the Central Valley would be just to the west of the city of David. You can just make it out here, kind of in the shadows, wrapping around the city of David, running from south to north on the west side of the city of David. Now we're gone up to the north. We're looking south now. So we're looking back down on the city of David. To orient yourself, notice the golden dome in the center of the picture. And so as we scan to the uppermost portion of the slide, that would be the city of David down there about where the Y is in Central Valley. And the Central Valley ran along the Temple Mount and then was the kind of the border of the city of David on the western side. You can just make out a slight depression where the words Central Valley are indicated in this slide. So again, we're looking to the south. Off in the distance, you can see the Kidron Valley that's kind of curving around. All right, here we are at the Western Wall, sometimes called the Wailing Wall, and Jews gather there today to give their prayers, to offer up their requests to God, and where they're standing today is right in the Central Valley, but it's been raised up many, many times due to the destructions, and that valley has gotten filled up to the point where it's almost imperceptible. I want you to notice where the people are standing today at the Western Wall. And if you look off to the left-hand side of this picture, you'll see a couple of arches. But you only see the top of the arches. It looks kind of funny. The one on the left, you'd almost have to stoop just to go through it. And the reason for that is originally when these were built, the floor of the valley was much, much lower. So this has all gotten filled in, and so where the ground level is now is much higher than it used to be in, say, the time of Jesus. This model of Jerusalem from the time of Jesus indicates the place where the people were just standing by the red arrow. So you see the red arrow there in the center of the picture? So that's where the people were standing at that height. And below their feet was about another 17 courses of stone down to the valley floor. And then from that red arrow, I want you to go to the left and see the arch there. That's the arch that you saw just a moment ago, and then the other one to the left of it. So you can see those arches were pretty high up originally, but now the floor of the valley has come up. But that's the way it was back in the time of Jesus. The Central Valley was much deeper. Here's a cross-section that shows the Kidron Valley on the right, where the Mount of Olives descends down, moves back up to the Temple Mount area. And you can see the natural contour of the land, so that Herod, when he wanted to flatten out the top of that hill, Mount Moriah, he built the retaining walls and then filled it in with earth so there'd be a nice flat area for the Jewish pilgrims to gather during the 3 great feasts. And so that's kind of been artificially filled in. But here you can see the Tyropoeon, or the Central Valley, as indicated by the original contour of the bedrock, and the lighter color indicating earth that's filled it up nowadays. All right, here we can see the Central Valley at the time of Jesus in this model of Jerusalem. We're looking due north, so the city of David starts in the bottom of our picture on the right, where the violet starts just to the left, so that's the Central Valley. To the right of that would be the city of David. Let's follow that up to the north. We come up to the Temple Mount area, and then it continues just to the left or to the west of the Western Wall today. Kind of ends a little bit farther to the north. So that's the Central Valley. Let's move over to the Valley of Hinnom, or the Hinnom Valley. And this valley wraps around Jerusalem. It's in the southern area and then wraps around, turns north, and kind of becomes a western boundary to Jerusalem. So the Hinnom Valley runs both north and south and east and west due to its kind of L shape. In this slide, looking pretty much due north, we see the Western Hill on the right, and then the Hinnom Valley in the shadow in front of us. So that extends the entire length of the walls here in the old city. And just for fun, I'll point out my school, which is on the right hand of this slide. Notice the tower, go to the building just below that, and that's the building of the school I studied at, Jerusalem University College. So I looked out over the Hinnom Valley, and sometimes the Hinnom Valley is associated with Gehenna. So we would joke that we would look out over the valley of hell from our school. So that was our view, looking out across the Hinnom Valley. Here's a night shot that I took in the same location. You can see how the road winds through there, crosses over a bridge, goes up to the other side, and then ascends, kind of meets up with the old city walls towards the top of our slide. This would be the Hinnom Valley. Let's talk about Jerusalem's history. Jerusalem has a fascinating history, a very long history. And so let's pick it up from the time of King David. And this is a drawing of Jerusalem at the time of King David. Notice that the western hill is unoccupied at this time. The city of David Hill, or the Ophel Hill, is occupied. That would have been by the Jebusites. And then just to the north of the city of David Hill, we see that roundish hill, Mount Moriah, is also unoccupied because Solomon had not yet built his palace there, had not yet built the temple there. So in the time of David, Jerusalem was quite small and just on the Ophel Hill, or the city of David Hill. Here's a closer up view of Jerusalem at the time of David. So Mount Moriah is still barren. There's the threshing floor of Aruna there at the top. We have David's palace and some other things indicated, but relatively small city. And this would have been the city in David's time. 2 Samuel 5, 6-7 says, "Now the king and his men went to Jerusalem against the Jebusites, the inhabitants of the land. And they said to David, 'You shall not come in here, but the blind and lame will turn you away,' thinking David cannot enter here. Nevertheless, David captured the stronghold of Zion, that is, the city of David." So the Jebusites had a pretty proud attitude. They thought even handicapped people could keep them away, and there was no way that David and his men were going to be able to capture it. Let's continue. David said on that day, "Whoever would strike the Jebusites, let him reach the lame and the blind, who are hated by David's soul, through the water tunnel. Therefore," they say, "the blind or lame shall not come into the house." Now, David's not trying to pick a fight with the blind or the lame. He's just responding to the Jebusites' boast. But he's saying that he's going to capture Jerusalem by this water tunnel. Now, there's a lot of debate over what the Hebrew word for water tunnel is here, the sinor. But many think it's a shaft, later described as Warren shaft by the person who found it. And that's how David got into the city. In this diagram, we can see the Gihon spring on the right, and then a horizontal shaft was built by Hezekiah later, after maybe 300 years after the time of David. But then there is this shaft that reaches down to near the Gihon spring, and the idea that's how the Jebusites brought water into the city, because you didn't want your walls all the way down low. Notice the Jebusite wall is a little bit higher than the Gihon spring. You really can't protect your city with the walls at the lowest point. So what they did is they accessed their water through this shaft that we know as Warren shaft. And one theory is that David and his men attacked Jerusalem by going up through this shaft. Here we can see Warren shaft today. Wouldn't have been an easy job climbing up that, but I guess David and his men were able to surprise the boastful Jebusites and capture Jerusalem. Okay, moving on from David's time to the time of his son Solomon, whom God had appointed to build the temple, we see that Jerusalem has expanded to the north, and that area is now built up and circled by the walls, and up there at the northernmost point would have been where the temple that Solomon built stood. Here's a little detailed view. We can see the temple there, and pretty much the same as David's city, but just that extension, the summit of Mount Moriah included within the city of Solomon. So that was Jerusalem in the days of Solomon. And Solomon built his temple there on the top of Mount Moriah, and it was a beautiful temple. As we move on a few hundred years to the time of King Hezekiah, around 700 BC, we see the city of David has expanded a little bit out to the east, down towards the Kidron Valley. And as we look to the left-hand side of our picture, we see that the city has spread to the western hill, and that's now enclosed. And so the city had grown much bigger in the time of Hezekiah. 2 Chronicles 32:5 says, "And he took courage and rebuilt all the wall that had been broken down and erected towers on it, and built another outside wall and strengthened the Millo in the city of David, and made weapons and shields in great numbers." So this is King Hezekiah, and he's getting ready because he knows that the Assyrians are coming. They've been threatening to attack his city for a while. Samaria in the north, the kingdom of Israel had already fallen to the Assyrians. So he knows that they're coming for him sooner or later. And so he's trying to get ready for that upcoming invasion. And so King Hezekiah built a wall that they call the Broad Wall today, or the Hezekiah's Wall. It is quite broad, but it was kind of hastily made because it was made in a hurry to get ready for the Assyrian invasion. And so here you can see that wall exposed. Isaiah 22:10 says, "Then you counted the houses of Jerusalem and tore down the houses to fortify the wall." So we see in the process of fortifying this wall, some houses had to come down. And that's pretty much what we see from the archaeological remains. There's the wall on the left-hand side of our slide, and then there looks to be a structure leading right up to it, but then it's torn down. It just abruptly stops. And so this is probably an example of some of the structures that were torn down to make way for Hezekiah's wall, exactly the description we have in the book of Isaiah.